For the latest in the YouTube channel, click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to the Gist on Strat News Global. Good evening, I'm Surya Gangadharan. Are India's ties with Russia under stress? Has India is India reviewing its relations with Russia in the wake of its invasion of Ukraine, which is going to mark 1 year on the 24th, and the economic destabilization that has come in its wake? These are some of the questions I'm going to ask Pankaj Saran, former Deputy National Security Advisor and head of the NatStrat think tank. Mr. Saran was also India's ambassador to Russia not very long ago. So, welcome.
Thank you, Surya. It's a pleasure to be with you all the time. Thank you.
So, Ambassador, how would you describe our relations with Russia at this point? Do you think this is perhaps the toughest period that our relationship, our bilateral relationship, is going through compared to, say, the past?
Well, firstly, thank you, Surya. I clearly the relationship is going through testing times, but I would not say this is the worst we have seen. I think the breakup of the Soviet Union and then the first decade of Russia in the 90s was a much worse period for Russia itself and for the relationship. Secondly, this is a crisis which actually does not involve us directly in any manner.
Yeah.
To put it in a certain way, what you see or what you have are two friendly partners of India at loggerheads with each other. The West
Mm.
on the one side, led by the United States, and the Russians on the other side. Neither of them has any problem with us, nor do we have any problem with them. So it's a difficult situation when two of your partners, established partners, are at conflict with each other. And then naturally, expectations from both are very high in terms of Indian support for their positions. So that I think is uh, causing a lot of the stress. In terms of the relationship with Russia, there are certain collateral damages because of the conflict, which are bread and butter issues: energy and food, fertilizer, sanctions, disruptions of normal trade. So these are the immediate collateral damages. But on the whole, if you look at the political relationship, the fact of the matter is that we do not actually have any bilateral dispute with Russia. We do not even share a border with Russia. Our problem is more, I would say, in a broader geostrategic context, that where you have two of your partners at war with each other, while your primary strategic adversary is sitting pretty on the sidelines, and
Yeah.
the entire world's attention is
Mhm.
focused on uh, the two partners that you have. As an Indian, I would like the
Mhm.
story to be exactly the other way around. That I would
Absolutely.
like the spotlight to be on China, what China is doing, what its ambitions are, how it impacts our regional and global security. But unfortunately, both the West and Russia are caught in this, this existential crisis of whether they can actually live together ever. We thought we had overcome this crisis in
Mhm.
1991 when the Soviet Union actually broke up and communism was defeated hook, line, and sinker. But it is unfortunate that 30 years later, the same ghosts of the past have come to haunt not just Russia or the West, but today the entire globe. And both in terms of its substance and in terms of its timing, this conflict is not good for India and for our own growth ambitions.
Mhm. Now, you mentioned China, that the whole focus should actually be on China. Instead, it has gone elsewhere. So, do we see Russia as a kind of a bulwark against China in Asia? How does this play?
Firstly, I think we see Russia on its own merits. So I'll answer it in two parts. Russia on its own merits because of the landmass, because of its endowment of resources, and because of its strategic location. Any simple textbook would tell you that this is a landmass you cannot ignore. No country can ignore. And we've had this relatively unbroken good partnership with Russia for last many decades. I would only exclude the decade of the 90s when Russia, for various reasons, decided to abandon Asia and court the West. And that was actually a quite of a pretty big strategic setback for India. But the correction was made in 2000. But insofar as the China angle is concerned, you know, we simply cannot afford to have a unipolar Eurasia. I mean, you already almost reached a stage where a unipolar Asia is now being seen before our eyes, but you
Yeah.
do not want this unipolarity to spread to the Eurasian landmass and the continent. And it is therefore critical for us to maintain our channels of communication and the relationship with Russia, uh, because Russia has done actually very little to hurt our direct interests. To the extent that they have a relationship with China, we can discuss that subsequently. Is something that we can discuss. But the problem with Russia primarily faces today is the Western world, and so when we talk about say Russia and China, our goal is to keep Russia in play, maintain help it maintain its preeminence in the Eurasian region, and build upon whatever complementarities there are, and there are many between the Russian and the Indian economies. Uh, Frankly, um, the Russia-China relationship uh, is multi-layered. So on the one hand, you have the formality of it and the semantics, but at another level you have the reality of it. And these are two very proud civilizations which have had a very turbulent history not so long ago,
Yeah.
including border disputes, etc. They're very proud people. uh, Russia is not going to easily accept or concede domination to China. But interestingly, if we should also see that there are very fundamental structural differences between the two of them. So, if Europe and the United States is the number one enemy of Russia, they actually happen to be the biggest trading partners of China. So, when you sit in Moscow, it's actually quite disconcerting to see your so called best friend in Beijing courting Europe and the United States and doing this entire trade, investment, political interactions with them. Similarly, when you sit in Beijing, it is difficult for China to digest the fact that Russia is supplying the most sophisticated technologies and weapons and maintaining this extremely cordial relationship with India, which is again a problem for China. So, even when you look at their interactions with third countries, there are contradictions. And lastly, I would say they're competitors for the same space. They're competitors for export of military technology, they're competitors for global influence. So, it is not as if it is a unblemished relationship. It is close and it is getting closer, but a lot of it is also involuntary on the part of the Russians because they are basically being pushed towards the Chinese.
So you would say that Russia is not in China's pocket, not yet anyway.
No, that's an extremely strong statement to make. I don't think that is true, and I don't think it'll ever be true. They have, see, I mean, for example, even the demographic threat from China, they find it a real threat. I mean, even if you look at, say, the Arctic region, like the Russian coastline constitutes about 50% of the Arctic coastline. The Russians
Yeah.
are never going to cede control of the Arctic Sea and the Arctic region and the Northern Sea route to China. They know that they are a little helpless today because they don't have the money to develop the infrastructure. But I do not see a situation where Russia will be, quote unquote, in the pocket of China. But it is a problem for us that they are being driven in that direction. And so there are some dimensions of the relationship which would suggest what you are saying. Even, for example, look at the trade pattern. It's the trading pattern is similar to a trading pattern between a colony and an empire, because it's
Yeah.
one way, it's raw materials feeding the Chinese growth, etc. But let's not forget. I mean, we keep forgetting these things, but I mean, the Russians, their nuclear arsenal is equal to that of the entire Western alliance. It's like, I don't know, 20 times the size of China. So, China has 300 nuclear warheads, they have 5, 6,000. So, there is no military comparison in terms of
Yeah.
hard power. Where Russia is actually losing out heavily is in terms of its economic success.
Mhm. But would you say the war in Ukraine has underscored the many, many deficiencies and weaknesses of Russia's military?
No, that's again a subject which really needs to be studied more. And I will not readily believe Western
Mhm.
media and Western analysts on this. I mean, they have got so many things wrong so many times, starting from Iraq and Syria and Libya. So we need a much more objective and an incisive analysis. As I have said sometime in the past, the utilization of the Russian military weaponry to fight the Ukrainians is a fraction of their total military strength. And so, if we are to judge the performance of their equipment or their military strategy, we can have a long discussion on it. But to buy the thesis that it was nothing but failure from day one, or that Russia is on its way to lose the war, I would not agree with either of them.
Mhm. So let's come to India, Russia. We are still getting the kind of certain technologies from Russia that may not be available from other parts of the world, from the West, for instance. But when you look at the demands from our economy, which is looking increasingly westwards, at finance and technology coming from the West, there is this um, divide in our Russia relationship, which is only going to deepen, isn't it?
Yeah, so the beauty about the way India is situated right now is you have to leverage your strengths, and you have to be smart in your approaches to the different major powers of the world, whether it's the West or Russia or China or anyone else. And you have to customize your relationships so that you maximize your own national advantage. So I agree that when it comes to high civilian technologies or critical and emerging technologies, maybe Russia is not the place to go to.
Mhm.
But if you look at the past few decades, the kind of military technologies that they have supplied to us and given to us are extraordinary. And it is not just a question of no one else giving them to us, but the fact that they possessed and they actually gave. And this is all happening despite their good relations with China. And China knows very well who these against whom these technologies are going to be used. So that's on the technology part. But Russia has many other long-term imperatives as far as our own national development is concerned. And I would say the most important is its endowment of natural, mineral, and energy resources. And we, given the size of India and the ambition levels we have for growth in the next 10, 15, 20 years, we are large enough to suck up the natural resources from every corner of the world. And we and if we have a good relationship with the ruling establishment in Russia, then automatically you have access to these resources. If it was a hostile government in Russia, you would not have access to these resources. So you need firstly these natural resources, whether it is energy or minerals or coal or diamond or even, I would say, fresh water. You need a friendly regime in Moscow. So so on the technology side, we have to then go to where the technology is available,
Yeah.
and it is not just available but where it is accessible to us. I mean, of course we have a history of where technology we know is available but is not available to us. And then On the Russian side, we have to that's our challenge, to be able to identify those technologies which Russia is good in, and as I said, uh, if you're looking at how to kind of increase your advantages with Russia, then look at Russia's other strengths, which are natural resources, and that's why, for example, in recent years, our outreach to the Far East, more recently, our intensification of discussions on the Arctic. These are futuristic areas, whose impact will be felt not now, but a few years down the line. So I would put it in that sense. I wouldn't kind of be obsessed with technology. I would be obsessed more with where I can get the maximum from each of these powers. And that's where I would like to be positioned, where I decide my terms of engagement with each of them.
So when you look at it, when you look at our Atmanirbhar, campaign, to build design more in India rather than buy from overseas, uh, what what we're looking at is maybe a decade down the line, the with the kind of perhaps defense projects that are getting underway, we are likely to see a lessening of that military relationship, which actually defines India and Russia, isn't it?
Yeah, so clearly, I mean, since 2010, there is no doubt there has been a diversification away from Russia in terms of simple military procurement of aircraft and many other things. And that is likely to, I think, accelerate this move away from Russia.
Yeah,
But at the same time, the legacy impact of existing stock is going to be with us for the next several, I would say, decades.
yeah,
When you look at a submarine, you look at an aircraft carrier, you need serviceability, you need maintenance, you need critical parts. So, yes, you may have 90% indigenization, but the point is that 10% which you don't have is what runs the whole platform. So, the dependency is going to remain, but even on that, we are finding solutions by trying to persuade the Russians to shift their manufacturing of spares and supplies and other things into India. I think the Kalashnikov 203 was a breakthrough because it
yeah,
wasn't easy to convince the Russians to actually move their production to India. They are very hesitant. They would agree to license production, but not production which is available to us. S-
yeah.
The secondly, I would say this crisis, Ukraine, offers a good opportunity for us to do what we have always been trying to do with Russia, which is to diversify our relationship away from defense and
Mhm.
military. And forcing Russia and Indian actors to find newer areas of cooperation. And of course, the first area where we have really succeeded is energy,
Yeah.
but there could be many more. So if this crisis becomes an opportunity to go forward with this diversification, so that it's not a unidimensional relationship, which is its success is counted in terms of how much military equipment I buy from Russia. I think that will be good for the problem. Actually, is that the Russian economy has unfortunately remained, let's say, stagnant for 30
Yeah.
years, and they have not reformed structurally. So if their economy is not diversifying, then it becomes very difficult to find sectors for cooperation.
Mhm. How do the Russians see our push towards, building in India, designing in India? What is their, is it a feeling, is it a sense of being let down by us? I mean, how do they see it?
No, if you ask a Russian official, he will give you 4 or 5 examples to prove how Russia is at the forefront of make in India, build in India. They'll talk about the BrahMos, they'll talk about the T-72 tanks. I mean, there is so many platforms which actually have, it's true, been built in India. Not to speak of some of your naval assets, etc.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, you know, see, intellectual property and the control of technology is what adds value to your steel and
yeah,
your hardware. You know, uh, And that's what they are very, and any country would be, cautious in parting with, because moment you part with your IPR and with your know-how, then there is nothing to distinguish you with anyone else. So there is a bit of a play out here, where they know that the future is in make in India and build in India. I think that message they have got, and they're moving in that direction. I mean, they offered the fifth generation fighter aircraft and other platforms and said,
Yeah.
we'll do it here, we'll do it in collaboration. So I think they read the writing on the wall, but and they have taken some actions in that direction. But as I said, that hesitation remains. And I suppose if you are a owner of this proprietary technology, you will always be a little hesitant. I mean, we would also be if someone we sold a military platform or a weapon to asked us to transfer the technology lock, stock, and barrel. There would be hesitation even here.
Yeah. So let's talk about Ukraine. We know the Prime Minister's famous statement to Putin that, this is not an era of war. Um, have we been within in close circles? Are we blunt in telling them what we think about this? Or the broader concerns that have risen from the manner in which Russia has invaded Ukraine?
I think we've been fairly blunt. I mean, both in public and in private. I think our external affairs minister has actually spoken quite bluntly about what we think of the war. Um, the mutual responsibilities of and actions and inactions of the Europeans and the Russians. And we knew it all along since 2014 that this was a time bomb waiting to go. And the fact that it's gone off in our face
Yeah.
and we've been able to do nothing about it, and one action has led to another, so it has spiraled out of control. And the responsibility for this rests definitely on the Europeans and the Americans. And of course, the responsibility for February rests with Russia. But I always like to say that the story of this conflict in Ukraine certainly did not begin on the 24th of February. And it is a
Absolutely.
classic case of a failure of political will, of political intent, of leadership, that we are where we are today. And um, everyone knows it, what the stakes are. I mean, it's not as if the Ukrainians don't, or the Europeans don't, or the Americans don't. Everyone knows the stakes involved and the importance of Ukraine to both sides. Now, the question is, this war may end, I mean, or it may just freeze into a
Yeah.
frozen conflict. And you may actually have the Russian positions as they are today frozen, with neither side being able to budge or change the reality on the ground. Pretty much like the line of control in Kashmir. So for
Mhm.
75 years, what happened in 1947, 1948 is what you're stuck with.
Mhm. Do you see the supply of tanks and offensive weapons to the Ukrainians by the Europeans and the Americans? Do you see that as could be a decisive stage in the war?
I think they are caught in a quandary because they have to supply, and but they are being very careful about quantities and about the quality and about the nature of the weapon. So these
Mhm.
commitments for tanks, etc., the tanks are not going to reach Ukraine tomorrow. They're going to
Yeah.
take months, maybe sometimes years. So, but they are also extremely careful not to escalate the militarization of Ukraine beyond a point. So, I don't think they're going to make a material difference. If the intention is to bleed Russia, then they have, and they know it. It's not as if they don't. That is going to
Yeah.
work the other way around also. And I think the bigger sufferer is actually going to be Ukraine, not Russia.
Mhm. So, last question. What can India do here? I mean, there's some talk that India was trying to pass on messages, I mean, short of mediation. But is there anything India can do as a friend of both sides, to be able to kind of get them to come together and start talking at least, if nothing else?
I think our approach has been very sophisticated. I mean, the way we have been articulating the kind of the global, the South, the street in the South, because the South is saying we don't want this conflict. It's not good
Yeah.
for us. We don't want the world to be divided into two. So we are doing that, and that is a message to everyone, to the Europeans, the Americans, the Russians. Stop it. I mean, get your act together. I mean, this is what you used to tell us when we had
Hmm.
problems with Pakistan or China. Now it's ironical that we have to tell you what we learned from you. So that's one way we are going about this whole thing of diffusing tensions. Second is, of course, we are talking to both sides. I mean, in public and in private, and I think that's as much as we can do. You cannot jump into these complex historical. It's
Yeah.
like someone saying, "I'll come and fix Kashmir." I mean,
Hmm.
no one does it.
Yeah.
So
Right.
you have to be a little
Yeah.
careful.
Yeah.
uh,
I can understand.
yeah.
Yeah. Ambassador
And
Saran.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Please go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that it sounds tempting to say I'll mediate,
Yes.
but people know that you don't jump into mediation. Firstly, if you're not invited, now
Yeah.
there may be pro forma invitations to please come, you help, but it's not so
Hmm.
simple. I mean, there is a long history. There are many factors. There's kinship, there's civilization, there's religion, there's culture. There's an overlay of so many factors. What we can do is indirectly, from the sidelines, not fuel the conflict, but at least try to diffuse and build up a narrative which reflects the anger and frustration in this global south about what's going on, and simultaneously also keep parroting the proposition that you must get down to the negotiating table and put a halt to this, because as far as we are concerned, this is not a problem for us. We have other much more serious threats to our national security and external environment, which have nothing to do with Ukraine or Europe.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
I mean, look at Afghanistan
Absolutely.
was in the headlines in August 2021. Between August 2021 to February 2022, it has been wiped out of the headlines
Completely.
of every single media space. I mean, and that is what is our much bigger problem. What
Hmm.
happens in Afghanistan, where Pakistan is going, and of course the whole issue of China.
So just to sum up, this is a tough period for India-Russia relations. The good point is that we are friendly with both of the antagonists, and we're able to convey our sentiments, our concerns to them. How much it actually plays out and in going forward is something hard to discern at this point. But in the meantime, there is a certain other areas, alternative areas that we've been able to open up with the Russians. So perhaps the ties with Russia are still there, still relevant, and have a future.
I think so. I think so. Russia is not going anywhere.
Absolutely, absolutely. Ambassador, thank you very much.
Thank you, Surya. Thank you so much.
For those of you who joined us on this conversation, do subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter and social media. Thank you and good night.